So just to run through the agenda tonight, so just a brief introduction set for myself, and then we're going to have community pharmacy view from Jonathan Morrissey, hospital pharmacy view from Eddie Mills, and then finally specialist home care provider view from Maeve Magner, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions and answers. So I suppose one of the questions that you might say, well, why are we having this webinar now? And really the main thing I suppose we want to do here is go into our objectives of maybe where we've come from. So we've made huge progress since FMD went live in February 2019. Now, many of you may not see that in practice in the sense that we're in a use and learn phase and you're ignoring the alerts. But behind the scenes, there's been a huge amount of work going on to improve scanning rates and also to address alerts and to reduce the avoidable causes of alerts. And with all of that work, we have seen the scanning rates increasing and we've seen the alert rates reduce substantially. We're making really great progress down to very, very low levels of alerts. So when I talk about an alert rate, I'm talking we have an alert rate of roughly 0.3% of scans produce alerts. So that's is very encouraging. At this point, we're still in use and learn, as I've mentioned. Our priority for this year in IMVO is to ensure that everyone is ready for the end of the current use and learn period. Now, a date hasn't been set for that yet. It's been kept under review, and obviously we've been taking into account things like COVID and Brexit. And when I say we, the decisions on ending use and learn will be made by a group called the Safety Features Oversight Group, which comprises ourselves, the Department of Health, the HPRA, the PSI, the HSC and the Private Hospitals Association. Now, in terms of community pharmacists and wholesalers' interests, they come through IMVO's representation on that group. And what we've done in the group is we've defined a set of prerequisites, some sort of agreed criteria that have to be met in order to make the decision to end use and learn. And it's things like having everyone scanning, having the alert rate at a certain level, having clear procedures in place for managing alerts so that we, when we make the decision to say, okay, use and learn is over, you now have to investigate every alert, that everyone is ready for that. And our job in IMVO is basically to support pharmacies, hospitals and wholesalers to be ready for the end of use and learn and to be able to manage alerts efficiently after it ends and to make sure we don't have patients delayed in getting medicines as a result of alerts. That's really the primary objective. In terms of the webinar here tonight, I think what we decided would be useful at this stage, because we know scanning has been a challenge for Irish pharmacists, and particularly there was no track record of scanning in the dispensary previously, unlike many other countries in Europe where they were scanning prescription medicines. So we've picked a few colleagues that we've come across over the last couple of years that we feel have got things well under control and are managing it well. And we felt it would be useful for them to share their experiences with yourselves. The other thing we want people to start doing is to think about, well, given that we have put this huge infrastructure in place and all these barcodes and packs and the scanners in place and equipment to read them, are there other things that you could be doing with this barcode scanning to add value to your practice? So it's really to start to think beyond the simple requirement to comply with FMD legislation. So that's what that's all about. So with no further ado, what I'm going to do now is I am going to call on Jonathan Morrissey to share a screen, and I'll introduce Jonathan to you. So Jonathan has been working in Marin's Pharmacy, which is actually a family business. And in fact, he's taken it over from his grandfather. Many of you would know his grandfather, Des Marin. So Jonathan took over from him in 2014. So Jonathan graduated from RCSI in 2009 with BSc Pharmacy, and then he did his MPharm and registered as a pharmacist. Now, what I was actually really interested to find out was that Jonathan had a life before he did pharmacy and actually did a degree in applied maths and experimental physics. So that was an interesting change of course, Jonathan, but always interesting to see what people have done before. And he's also involved in the Irish Pharmacy Union as a member of the Community Pharmacy Contractor Committee. Now, the reason we asked Jonathan to do this talk was we had done a pilot last autumn with, we're piloting an alert management system. And Jonathan was one of the community pharmacists that was in the pilot. And one of the things we realized was Jonathan had very few alerts. So, he was striking us as a pharmacist with this thing well under control. So we thought it would be a very good example of a community pharmacist to share his experiences with you today. So with no further ado, Jonathan, I'm going to hand over to you and let you take the floor there.
Thanks, Leonie, and good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here and contribute to this. If it can help anyone get some direction on what they need to do in regards to FMD, I'd be delighted. So I just get my screen share going, and hopefully that's working okay for everybody now. So just
yes, perfect.
Thanks, Leonie. Quick bit of background just on my team. So we are a community pharmacy in Clane and Kildare. Clane is not is probably a large village, a small town. It's not on the scale of a Naas or anything like that. But in terms of our team and who we have here, there's one full-time senior pharmacist who's myself, who tends to do 5 to 7 days a week. And then I have 2 part-time juniors that both do 4 days each. So we've got good MPSI, cover in the dispensary at all times with 2 on duty. And in addition to that, we'd have a part-time pharmacy student that does a couple of days. So again, we've another, intelligent person helping us out. And then we've a wonderful senior technician and a technician student. So we have a robust dispensary team. And on top of that, then we'd have 6 people on rotation out the front, and we've 2 dedicated online staff members. And in terms of our business breakdown, then we would be 7 days a week since 1957. I only get Christmas Day off. And when you live in a village like Clane, sometimes that rule is broken as well because people have your mobile. So now, as of the last 2 years, we have both the traditional community pharmacy in year 64, and we have an online store in year 2. Community pharmacy is still 97% of the business, whereas the online store is 3%. But interestingly enough, what's kind of scary, I suppose, for bricks and mortar, if you look, the bricks and mortar is 26% of the 100 in retail, and the online is 3%. After 1 year, it's over 10%, nearly catching up. So there's growth to be had there. We are a very busy dispensary for a large village. We do about 7,000 prescription items a month. And we're very busy over the counter as well. Lots of consultations, lots of products, lots of interactions. And I think most people would know me more for my pharmacy services, which I'm very passionate about. And in the flu season just gone by, I personally administered over 1,200 vaccines myself. So that was quite a lot. I have a track record in good vaccinations, but this year I couldn't believe what we did. Last year was shy of 600, so that was a doubling. But we would also offer many other paid additional consultation room based services, such as blood pressure, offering injection administration, B12, Prolia, blood thinners for people who can't manage it, first aid consults, weight management, and they've all gone through the roof really in the COVID world because many of our GP colleagues reduced the teleconsults. So, there's very much a role for pharmacy here in terms of expansion, and I can only see that going one way. Now, when it came to FMD, we all had to get on board with it. So from a software point of view, it made most sense to us to just opt and use the FMD module offered by our existing dispensary provider, who happened to be McLernan's. In terms of the people who we had to bring along, we had an integrated, busy dispensary team, but we decided we'd see how we get on with one device. We looked at whether we would go wireless or wired, and we weighed up different things. We decided one wired device central to the dispensary. In terms of SOPs, we sat back and we said, right, how are we going to integrate this into our process? No more than any of us would not endorse a prescription. We had to get on board with the fact that we have to decommission all medicines now. And obviously the legislation requires that it's at the point of assembling the prescription or just before it goes to the patient. I have my own issues with that, which I'll come to later, but that's what we did. We took all the staff aside and we basically broke it down and said, lads, this is now part of your dispensing process. Get used to it, get into it, mark the boxes when you have it done. Boxes shouldn't go out unless they're marked. We're lucky because we have that integrated dispensary team that we don't use many locums. So we have a very consistent and united approach to FMD and decommissioning packs and marking boxes. That said, it didn't mean we didn't have any issues. Practically, I still find even now that a lot of boxes, I mean, I'm the pharmacist, nothing goes out before my final check or one of the other pharmacists' final check. We still get boxes not being marked. And obviously that's a concern. When you're checking prescriptions, I found that I was getting wrapped up and tied in looking at, did you scan this? Who decommissioned that? Was this done? And I found that my attention was moving a little bit to worry so much about decommissioning of packs and less on the prescription in hand when the two should be going together, I would still come across split packs on a shelf which haven't been marked. So we have to redress that this has to be brought up to speed. And as I said, in the beginning, I found FMD to be quite distracting. I was so preoccupied with whether stuff was decommissioned or not. I want to do in pharmacy everything to the best of my ability and to adhere to all the guidelines that we're meant to do. So I found that quite stressful. Some of the other things that we came across were authentication delays. So you're preparing a large prescription for a patient, 10 plus items, 12 plus items, whatever. We would gather them all up, we would label them, dispense them, do all that part, and then the last thing we did was bring them for FMD decommissioning. So you come up to the scanner and you have your packs already in your basket and you take them one by one, beep down, next beep down, next beep down, and you would repetitively go through them all and then you would mark them all. And then you would just eyeball the FMD authentication software for a second and you realize you've just scanned 10 things, but you're seeing 6 products on the screen. And what we discovered at the time was that just because the system was beeping didn't mean it was registering the product. What was happening in real time was the product was being beeped. It was going up to the IMVO and checking with the database and then coming back and being ticked as a green tick to say it was okay. And I had an issue with that because I feel that the FMD stuff should be as quick as we should be. If it beeps, I presume it's accepted to the system and it's being checked, and I don't have to follow back up on it again because this is operating in the background behind my MPS. It's not front and center on the screen. So as I, callously said before, I expect the computer to explode if there's an issue with a product. We want to be able to move as quick as we move. We could have some days where we're doing 400 items, 450 items. It can't all be like, is everything decommissioned? We want it seamless in the background and without any issues. So I videoed that process. I took 6 boxes, I videoed it, I scanned them at a reasonable rate, not very fast, a reasonable rate, and I videoed it and I sent it to the IMVO, who on my behalf interacted with McLaren's to fix the system and have it work a little bit better. So the IMVO are there to help with that regard, and then I could stop worrying about that. We had a couple of software failure experiences as well, where again, the system would just wholesale crash. In the use and learn phase, that's okay, it's not a big issue yet, but when we go live at the level of busyness that we are, that would stress me out a lot if the system was down for long and how I'm supposed to decommission those medicines after, and you have people waiting for prescriptions. So a very simple solution which helped my crew, because what I kept finding was products were not being marked. And here's our FMD scanner, and above it we stuck a pen to the underside of the counter. Now you're probably all laughing, I still laugh, but I wear scrubs and some of the staff don't wear scrubs, so I've always got a pen in my pocket, so it's easy for me to mark. But all the staff would do is in a single motion, they would decommission up past the scanner and up past the pen, and that box was marked. It doesn't have to be a neat X or anything like that, but it was done. And it meant when I came to check in a prepared prescription, I could see a mark on the end of the box next to the barcoding, and off we go. Might sound crazy, works for us. So the pen was, again, it sounds crazy, but it was a big thing. For me as the pharmacist, wanting to know, are my team decommissioning all these products? Are they checking that these products are authentic or not? I need to see that an effort has been made at that. I can't personally dispense every single thing in the pharmacy, but I need to know it's done. So that was a big help. From a team point of view, as we all accepted that FMD is part of the dispensing process, that was really, really helpful, because everybody knew we had to do it. When the scanner went down, we all got stressed, and that was good. Somebody got on the case of it and got it fixed. I'd be excited for the future with regard to robotics, because I think that's an area I'm going to go, and it's nice to know that a robotics aspect will do the FMD thing for me too. So that's something that I think would work well for other people. The type of pharmacist I am, I want to spend most of my time with my patients, not doing what I consider technical stuff of a technician. As a pharmacist, I want to receive a prescription, review it, do a clinical check, and go and talk to the patient. I don't want to necessarily gather it, label it, decommission it, double check expiries and all that. I have to do all that, but that's not where I want to be. I want to be out having those consultations and making people's lives better. So what I would love to try kind of differently in the future is this thing of point of entry scanning rather than what we have, which is point of dispensing. We're not allowed at the moment because EU legislation requires that pharmacies decommission that product at the point of sale, whereas hospitals can decommission that goods inward. And I'll come back to why I would like to do that in a moment. We might look at a second scanner if we don't go towards the robotics thing. Again, sometimes we can be queuing up at the scanner at very busy times, waiting to get stuff decommissioned. That is the big pro, is that you can keep going. And at times you just need to keep going. The con is the extra cost, and none of us are happy that there's any cost to this at all. It burdens our process more, but it's part of the process and we have to accept it. Some things to watch out for. It's very important, and I'd say most people know you can't send decommissioned packs back to the wholesalers. They have to be active in the system. The 10-day turnaround on returning stock to the wholesaler, obviously that plays into that. So most people, when they realize they've received a product that they don't need, will send it back same day and not decommission it anyway. Obviously, when products get decommissioned, so if people are thinking that, yeah, we might supposed to be do it at the point of dispensing, but it might do it at the point of entry, and you decommission products and you mark those boxes and you send them back, you can't send a marked box back to the wholesaler. So that's something else to watch out for. A kind of big one that caught us out in the early days was using the software in decommission mode. I'll have a screenshot in a minute of the software where there's your verify mode, but then you can also recommission a product. So if you had it carelessly or accidentally left on recommission mode and you're scanning away, it's not going to put those products back up in the system, but it's not going to decommission them either. So when we move past the use and learn phase, that might catch some people out. At some point, the system is going to get tight on multiple scans. A very handy way for counterfeiters to try and put a false product on the market would be to get some actual real codes. So the system will be set up, I presume, to receive multiple scans in different locations. So if you're scanning something repeatedly in your pharmacy because you haven't marked it or whatever, that could flag as an error in the system and create alerts which create a headache for you. So it's important to mark your boxes. And another one that I have there is regular barcodes. So the scanners are super sensitive. I hope you can see that there. I can't see myself, so I just want to get that in picture. Yep. So the scanners are super sensitive. So they pick up on regular barcodes 10 times quicker than they pick up on the FMD barcodes. So we've got in the habit of taking our boxes around that to scan it. And you wouldn't believe the amount of times that you would be holding a box like that, pointing this bit at the scanner, and it's read that down there. And again, it's just stuff that slows you up and drives me crazy when I'm delayed. Some products have, you know, annoyingly put their barcode in their FMD scanner in the exact same plane. So again, you've got to approach the scanner with it covered just for convenience and not having to deal with any issues, okay? Some ideas for barcodes beyond FMD use. So obviously, if you have a product or a specific batch recall, you can look at the system and narrow in on your dispensing window of when you have sent that to a patient. We don't align specific barcodes or brands or anything we dispense with patient files in Ireland. I think they do in other European countries, but we don't. So if you have a product recall and you have to go back and ring 100 patients if it's a common drug, but there's only a specific batch issue, I think FMD might be able to help us out there and reduce a big headache, which happens rarely, but can happen. Another one that I came across in talking to colleagues is for potential dispensing errors. Now this is scenario dependent, and a colleague that works in Clane one day was dispensing flecainide, you know, Tambicor. It's a dangerous medicine, and the patient had left the pharmacy and he had a freak out because he was like, did I give him the 100 milligram or the 50 milligram? And he went to the patient file. He happened not to have the patient's number on file to ring the patient. So you know yourself, we've all been in that scenario where we're starting to sweat if you did something wrong. So he was like, I may ring the doctor, maybe they'll have a number. And his colleague just said to him, just check the FMD there and see that you scan a Tambacor 50 and a Tambacor 100 today. And he was able to horizon scan down back, and there was no Tambacor 100 today. There was only a Tambacor 50. He was more relaxed straight away, which was helpful, but he still rang the patient to double check. But that's just something that might work on a community level. So some problems I see or have with FMD is that many medicines are still displaying insufficient information, not all of it, and that can hinder your confidence in the scanning if you want to check back on something. And that screenshot I said, so these are some products scanned today, like literally today. These two here and this one down here. I don't know what they are, and if I had to investigate an alert with those, I would find that challenging. Now, because of this webinar tonight, when this happened, I looked at exactly what they are. One was a parallel import of Xalacom eye drops, but the other was a perfectly regular medicine, Azopt eye drops from the wholesaler. So if I had received an alert based on those products, that would have stressed the hell out of me trying to track back and see what am I looking at, what was the issue. As I said, point of dispensing scanning has some weaknesses versus point of entry scanning. In theory, you order in a medicine, it sits on your shelf. Patient comes in, you dispense the prescription. You scan the medicine at the point of dispensing and you discover an alert with it. In theory, that patient may have to go without that medicine because you've no time for corrective measures to get another one in and supply the patient. That's a weakness in the system. The majority of medicines that come into my pharmacy never, ever go back. So, you know, I think a lot of time, like you say, your aspirins, your amlodipines, those things that go out in droves, it would be great to decommission them, you know, in a block, have them on the shelf, ready to go, to condense the dispensing process. They're not going to go back. They are only going to go to a patient. And I think the system as a whole could look at that in the future. In general, I sometimes find that FMD is a bit of a hammer to crack a nut. And what I mean by that is I am a pharmacist in Clane in County Kildare in Ireland. And if the whole system, the wholesale system, the manufacturer system, everything relies on me to find the counterfeit medicine that's on the market, I think the system is broken. And I only buy from legitimate wholesalers and suppliers. So if they're getting products from the wrong places and it needs to come down to me to discover that, I think that's kind of a wrong way about going about it. But nonetheless, FMD, lads and ladies, is here to stay. At the very center of what it is patient safety. Okay, so that's a good thing, and it'll never be rolled back on because that's what it's set out to achieve, to make sure patients get legitimate medicines and no problem products. We all know that when we move past use and learn, there will be a stick, there will be sanctions, there'll be issues from our regulators. So I would like to see maybe a bit more carrot. I would love to see a move, and it'll require legislation change at EU level. It'll probably never happen, but it would be for people who are dragging their heels and not getting on with this. If you could do point of entry scanning and things get a little bit easier on teams, that they accept it, that it's a natural insertion in our process, just a little bit of leeway, I think that might work, but we might need another carrot there somehow. It has to be done, and I think sanctions only doesn't, I think, win hearts and minds. Lastly, which is important, I have found the IMVO helpful when I've come across issues. I am that type of pharmacist that wants to be upstanding and do things as we should. So when I found issues with my system, I contacted the IMVO. There are many systems. So if your system is giving you issues, you should raise it. If those issues are reasons why you're not engaging with FMD, then you have to engage, because we all have to get along. It's part of the dispensing process. There's no way of rolling back on it now. So thanks for listening.
That's great. And thanks very much, Jonathan. That was very interesting. I suppose I'm going to say straight up, and you'll smile when I say this, I think you may forget about your carrot of point of entry for pharmacies. I honestly don't think it's going to happen. It's enshrined in European legislation at this point, and it's not perceived as one of the areas that would be looked at. But look, you know, I think it's always good to have an idea in your head, and I think, but I'm completely realistic about it. I don't think that's going anywhere.
And that's fair.
One interesting point, there was a couple of interesting points made that I'll pick up on later on, but I think definitely the point you made about contacting us, It's very useful if someone contacts us when there's a problem with the software, because if we are made aware of a software problem, we can contact the software provider and we can fix that problem for every pharmacy. It's the same if we get contacted with a batch, but there's a problem with a particular pack, we can get a whole batch fixed. So, you know, it is really, really helpful for us when people lift the phone and ring us with questions, because we do whatever we can to try and fix them for as many people as possible. So, you know, that's something to say. There's a few other bits and pieces I might come back on later, but what we'll do for the moment is we'll keep going. And if there's a few nice comments in the chat. I think Jack Shannon put an interesting comment in there about software providers programming software not to beep, you know, when the scan, but rather to wait until it's been authenticated. We can come back on those. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move on now to Eddie Mills. So thanks, Jonathan. As I say, we'll come back. I suspect there'll be questions for you later on. So Eddie, I would like to introduce to you. Eddie is the senior pharmacy technician in the Blackrock Clinic, and he's been working there for 5 years, and he works in purchasing and supply chain activities and aseptic manufacture. And the reason we asked Eddie to speak today is that we came across Eddie when Niamh Bonner, the chief pharmacist in the Blackrock Clinic, invited us out to have a look at what they were doing in the Blackrock Clinic. It was a couple of years ago that we were invited out to come out and see what they were at. And Eddie was a key player in a lead in the Blackrock Clinic's FMD procurement and implementation program. And what we were really interested to see was how they had done it as a team effort across the hospital, and clearly had given an awful lot of thought to how this needed to be implemented. So that's the reason why we've invited Eddie to come along today to present to you. So with that, Eddie, I'll hand over to you and you might just share your screen there.
Yeah, thanks very much, Leonie. 1 second while I share the screen. Cool. Hopefully you can all see that. And thanks again, Leonie. Yeah, it's lovely to be able to share our experience. Actually, I'll say lovely, but thanks for asking. Yeah, we're happy to share our experience because I think we've learned a lot along the way, and we've also changed a few things recently, which hopefully would be of benefit to some people out there. And again, there's a few things that Jonathan said, and I was looking at the chat box in the meantime. So there's a few things that's already been raised, which is of interest as well to me. So one of them, I'll just, before I do start, is I think someone was asking, if I can read back, we find that scanning is very consuming, and the portable scanners don't alert you to the problems. So what we've found from that is, yeah, the scanners make a beep and the software makes a beep. So we were getting beep, 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 beep all day. So it was a question of which one to turn off. So we turned the scanner off and left the computer on, turned the volume down slightly. So that was one thing, you know, if there was a beep, if there was an alert or something wrong, the beep would change. So we found that quite useful. I'll kick straight in. So yeah, like I said, a quick introduction. Sorry, my name is Eddie Mills, like Leonie says, and I've been working in the Blackrock Clinics for just over 5 years now. And in that time, I've kind of developed in my own interests and my own career. And one of the interests and things that I'm working on at the moment is purchasing and supply chain, and that has led me into working on FMD. So we were pretty interested in how that would work early on. So we kind of learned about FMD. Well, it was talked of for a few years, but no one really took much notice of it until we had to. And it was probably 6 months before the legislation was due to come in that we started looking at it a bit more seriously. And so we quickly had to kind of identify how that would affect us on a day-to-day level. And one of the things we kind of thought was, is it just a pharmacy related thing? And or are there going to be other locations that we need to look at as well? And we're not a big hospital, we're not a big campus at all. And looking at the directive and the annex, the products that would be in scope, it was quite obvious that it wouldn't just be a pharmacy thing. there'd also be products in the labs and in our stores department as well. So we identified that there'd be 4 locations on our campus that we'd need to look at implementing this, and that there'd need to be software and things, training added to those locations. So we decided, because the scope of this would be quite big for us, that we'd set up what we called a huddle. And that was a working group that we could meet weekly and discuss how that how the progress was going at the time. So yeah, we met weekly. That was set up by our project manager, and Neve, my chief pharmacist, was heavily involved in that. So we had the main stakeholders of hospital and outpatient pharmacy, stores, lab, our IT department. They were all there quite regularly. So we were identifying the scope of the products each week, and kind of sharing the knowledge that we were gaining along the way. It was really useful, that, because we were all reading kind of independently and then meeting up weekly. So, you know, I was able to give a bit of information to the labs, and the labs were able to say what their own groups were feeding into that as well. So we kind of learned a lot along the way. We gave our preference of how we wanted it to work in terms of software, and you know, we preferred to have wireless scanners, because like most hospitals, we have a lot of bulky orders, and having a wired scanner just wasn't going to be something for us. So we kind of all brought something to the table that we wanted. We decided to, this was before the deadline of February 2019, so we decided to trial software from one of the suppliers. So we were kind of able to do that because we were working behind the scenes before the deadline. We looked at, instead of something that already integrated with our pharmacy system, we wanted something that could be a bit quicker for us to implement, and something that didn't require a huge project for our IT department, because they were, and still are, under a lot of pressure. So we initially decided that a web-based browser software would be the one for us to try. So we tried that. It worked perfectly. So we set the contract up on that, and I think everyone's registered now, but that whole process was very easy for us. So we got that all done before the initial deadline. So yeah, our early learnings then, obviously it's a big task and a big thing to change into your daily work flow. So orders were taking a lot longer to put away. Not only do you have to kind of check the item against an invoice, you have to check the tamper seals before you even get to the scanning stage, and then putting them away. So our goods in process had to change just to accommodate FMD. I won't lie and say it was plain sailing all the way. There were a few kind of training and technical issues. Happy to say that's all sorted now, but it took a while for us to bed it in properly. And then each week we were still going back to our huddle and explaining our experiences through that as well. So yeah, we've had staff training, and we've been trying to develop SOPs. At the moment, what's worked better for us than a full policy or procedure is a workflow chart that we've put into a Word document and sent out to everyone. That's really easy to kind of follow. So that kind of helped at the beginning in terms of staff training. Rather than throwing a massive SOP at everyone, we just developed a small Word document which everyone could follow the flow on. We've had connection issues, both with, like Jonathan mentioned, the kind of authorization from us to the IMVO, and also the software. We're not an old building, but there's the IT system. It's not always the best. So we've had internal and external issues with that. And sometimes you just can't scan. So luckily we are in the use and learn stage that we can say, okay, computer's not working, it's on the shelf. But you know, that's not ideal, but at the moment there's no other kind of a way around that. But we are hopefully changing some of our IT systems internally, so that would make the connection issues much better. Yeah, so I think Jonathan kind of touched on it as well, but for us in hospital environment, we get a lot of bulk orders. I'll show you a quick shot of a daily order that from recently, but that was only a small order. But we get bulk orders in a couple of times a week. So when you're going through a lot of totes and a lot of orders coming in, it's very difficult to kind of keep an eye on what you're doing at the same time as scanning and looking at a computer and then putting that on the shelf. So we've got almost, when we've got big orders coming in, we've got 2 or 3 technicians working on it at the same time. So it's a big process. That's why things like having the beep on the computer instead of the scanner, it can be useful. We've also been able to kind of change a few things as well. We've got a mobile kind of laptop on wheels as such. We've hooked that up to our FMD software and with another scanner, so we can wheel that around to where we need and scan at the location where the bulk is being put on the shelf. So that's a really really useful thing we've been able to do. I think I've got some photos here. Yeah, so if you, I mean, a lot of you will see this every day. This on the left hand side of the screen here this is our entrance into the pharmacy. So we've not got a lot of space to deal with, and that was one of the things we were looking at the early part of the implementation. We have a lot of space constraints, and how would this piling up as such of orders, how would that affect that space? So it was a worry and a fear at the time, but happy to say that the process is kind of almost streamlined to such an extent that it doesn't really interfere with the space we have, luckily, because it's quite small. Yeah, you can see we're even piling, sorting things out here on the shelf, ready to scan, and new orders are coming in. I'm not looking too impressed because we've got about 500 fusi-thalamic that have come, and I've got to line them all up in my tray before I scan them. And just as a kind of side note, these things like this come in from the wholesalers in sort of plastic wrapping in 25s, and they kind of say that they can't scan it through that plastic wrapping, but here's evidence of that they obviously can, because there is one. This is our laptop on wheels and our scanner. That's a wireless scanner, really handy, and like I say, it's quite thin. We can just wheel that around to where we need to go. And here, don't know if you can see that, it's kind of blocked off on my screen, but this is just the rest of the 500 took us about 20 minutes to put away. This was the initial software that we installed. So when we scanned a product, you couldn't see any product information on the screen. It just gave you a product code, batch number, and expiry date. It was at the time when all the vendors were kind of releasing their demos and stuff, they all looked very similar. They've all got a traffic light system, and at the time, we were kind of assured that all the product details will come along down the updates along the way. Unfortunately, they never really did on this software. So when we had to scan a product, all you got was a green light, off you go. And we're very lucky in hospital, like Jonathan says, that we can scan and decommissioning goods in, because for us, those bulk orders would be a nightmare, and otherwise. So we scan and decommission in one step, it goes on the shelf, but we were just getting a green light as you go along. No product information. So if we wanted to look back on a report or an alert, you wouldn't know from looking at that what product you're actually trying to find. This was an example of an alert that we had. Again, no product information. So this could have been out of a total of 500 items, and we'd no idea what that item was. So things like that, we kind of thought we need to change something here. We need to change the software. So we started looking at, we knew there was plenty of other vendors that had basic functionality like product information, So that was where we started looking. Recently, we've changed. We've completed the training for all our staff. We do have pharmacy students as well, and they're trained on it, and it's really good for everyone to learn how we use this in hospital settings. Like I said, the workflow and the goods in now is working quite well. Don't get me wrong, we still get huge orders in, and we're all saying, oh, we need to scan it now, but it's got to a stage where we're pretty good at making that quite streamlined. As I briefly mentioned, we did switch our software provider. It is quite easy to do if you're thinking of doing that. The IMVO are really kind of, they want you to get the most out of the scanning process. So if you think that it's not working for you, then look elsewhere. It's just a question of letting the IMVO know that you're switching software provider, and then they can have that down on their records. So like I said, one of the reasons we switched is because we wanted to look at data and reports that were coming in, and the idea as well was how can we use that data? We're scanning it into someone's software, but how can it be of benefit to us? How can we use it? So one of our early thoughts was, I'm sure everyone hates going around the shelves looking through expiries and expiry date checking. It's one of the worst jobs in pharmacy. So we thought, if you're scanning a product, why can't we export that data onto an Excel sheet so that we can track our expiries? Now, at the moment, it's not foolproof because there's still products coming in that aren't compliant, and there's still some unlicensed medicines and fluids that don't have barcodes. So you still have an element of manual check-in at the moment, but we are using that. I'll show you a little example, but we are using the data for expiry date tracking and report management as well. So by that I mean we've I'm sure Niamh would correct me here if I'm wrong, but we had a recent kind of, not a dispute, but a wholesaler had something on their invoice which we actually didn't receive, and they'd no kind of resolution to it, and we were able to check on our Excel spreadsheet that we hadn't scanned those products in, and so it was another kind of example. It gave us a little bit more feedback for them on that. So this is the new kind of software that we've gone for. It's much easier for us to look at on the screen. This one does get this one gives us the beep on the screen. I don't think the old software did that for us. So it's really easy. You've got the traffic light on the right and product information. So when we saw that, it was like, brilliant. At least we know we've got the right product instead of just looking at batch number every day. So this is, if you can see that properly, it might be a bit small actually, but this is our recent, so this is our expiries for the end of April that I'll be looking at. These are just all one product of multiple scans, but I can kind of condense that into each product if I want to. So at the end of each month, I'll check this list along with the manual one that we use as well, that the technicians check manually as well, kind of every month. So that's been really useful to us. The kind of idea is, okay, yes, we all have to get on board. Because it's an EU directive, so everyone's going to have to get on board. But how can we make it work for us instead of just us doing something that we're being told to do? So very early on, things like aggregation, which I know is possible, that was all talked of, and that would have made life very easy. But we were kind of just thinking, as well as that, what else can we do on a day-to-day that makes things easier? So every time that's scanned in, we can check the expiries. If a wholesaler comes back to us on a query, we've got evidence of what we've scanned. So like I said, I kind of mentioned on the internet dipping in and out, that's actually kind of resolved with the new software. It's actually got much better, and as well, you know, at the same time we've got kind of better facilities on our IT system. So yeah, that's basically. Oh, sorry. And here is yeah, this is an alert on the new system. So much better information. Even kind of, this is an example. This isn't a real one. I got this from the website from the vendor, but this would give you where to contact, a phone number, hopefully who to ring. It's the wholesaler or the manufacturer. Someone probably correct me on that, but it's a number or instructions on what to do. So much better for us, instead of just a red dot with nothing on there. That's it really. I wasn't going to keep too long. I hope that's been a bit of use to you, and if there's any questions, I'll be here at the end. That's it. Thanks very much.
Super, Eddie. That was really interesting, and I think just to see how you've moved on and how you changed software vendor, lots of practical learnings. And in fact, what I'm picking up as we're going through this, there's a few points that have been raised by yourself and Jonathan, and I imagine Maeve will have a few as well, and I'll just respond to them. But I'm actually picking up a few ideas of things that we will do to help, because it's certainly raised, I think there's some information gaps we need to fill. And so this is very timely, having this conversation and hearing from you all. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to Maeve Magner. And again, Maeve is another of the people we've come across over the last couple of years as we've been dealing with FMD. Well, now Maeve and I go way back, but we've come across each other in the FMD world in the last couple of years. And again, we were very interested in what Maeve was doing, that she's had a really good grasp on the whole FMD project from the outset. And also what was particularly interesting for me was I had heard separately about FMD barcodes being scanned in haemophilia products down to patient level, and I was really interested then when I realised that actually TCP were providing the service. So I invited Maeve to come along as a result of that. So just give you a bit of background about Maeve. So she's the superintendent pharmacist of TCP Home Care. She was previously responsible person there under their wholesale authorisation. So she has she's a pharmacist qualified out of Trinity, and she also has a master's in pharmaceutical care of the elderly from Trinity. She worked in community for 12 to 13 years and then went into James's and worked as a clinical trial pharmacist there, setting up the oncology and hematology trials. And then she moved into the main pharmacy department, working again in hematology and oncology before moving into an aseptics unit there, the big aseptic compounding unit in James's as chief 2 pharmacist on a mat leave cover. And after that, then she joined TCP Home Care back in 2013. And I'd say it's safe to say Maeve, your role has developed and the activities in TCP has developed hugely in that time. So they specialise in bringing specialised pharmacy services, bringing effectively home hospital care to the home. So with no further ado, Maeve, I'll hand over to yourself. Thanks for that.
Sorry. So hopefully you can all see the slides now. Great.
Yeah, perfect.
Great. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present tonight. So I'm going to focus really on the other uses of barcode scanning, in particular, how we scan barcodes throughout the supply chain and what we do in terms of batch tracking. And hopefully that'll give you a little bit of inspiration or some food for thought to take that away and look at what possibilities are out there. I'm very lucky. I've been with TCP for 8 years now, and I suppose barcode scanning is an integral part of our quality management system, and the building blocks of our patient care and what we do in terms of pharmacy dispensing is based on batch tracking and barcode scanning. So I'll give you a little bit of background on TCP and the services we do, and hopefully you find that interesting because we are very different. We're a very different pharmacy. Speak a lot about barcodes. We'll touch on FMD a little bit. I will talk about the history of barcode scanning and how that came about in TCP, and I will spend a bit of time talking about haemophilia and how we've learned from our history there. We look at other applications in use for the GS1 barcodes as well, and we'll have some questions then at the end. So the pharmacy in TCP is very unusual. So we specialise in rare or ultra rare disease, orphan drugs. Most of the drugs that we have are IV, so intravenous medication. High value and low volume medicines. And I suppose that becomes important when it comes to the barcode scanning. We have a HPR license and we also have a PSI license. I suppose 90% of what we do would be dispensed on foot of a prescription out to patients. Our funding streams and I suppose the way that the medicines are paid for is unusual. And as I mentioned, some of the medicines are very high in terms of cost. And the ethos of the company is to bring hospital care home. Our patients are all around the country, so they're not just Dublin based, they're all around the country. And I suppose one thing that's really good is we have patients who may be going in traditionally into hospital, an hour or two's journey into hospital, sitting around in a waiting room, waiting for an infusion, an hour or two's journey home. And instead of which we bring the care to the home, and our nurses will go in and give IV administration in the home, and we even give IV administrations of medicines in school for children. So that saves our families and our patients so much time, and I suppose makes their life so much easier. So these are some of the services that we would run in TCP in the pharmacy. The National Haemophilia Service, we have about 260, 270 patients with severe haemophilia. I will speak quite a bit about that throughout the presentation, because that is where we have our track and trace system, where we serialize files and we follow them right down to the patient level. We run a nice service for advanced Parkinson's patients. It's an unusual drug. Again, that is another drug that we would scan within the supply chain. It comes into us frozen. The next service we do is around our orphan products. A lot of these products would be ERT, or enzyme replacement therapy products. These are ultra rare diseases. We might have 2 or 6 patients in the entire country. And I like this service in particular when it comes to following kind of our barcodes and our serialized files throughout the patient stream. So we would scan something right from the time that it comes into the warehouse, right through the supply chain. We scan it out to the patient, and then our nurse will scan that in the home before she administers it to the patient. So it's just kind of all the way through right to the bedside. You've probably heard of the National OPAT program, which is IV antibiotics in the home. We run some patient support programs. We do TPN, and that actually is something that is exempt from scanning for FMD. Immunoglobulins are very important as well, because like the haemophilia products, they are derived from blood. And I suppose we'll hear a little bit later about the importance of recall in those types of products and what can go wrong. Clinical trials is another place where I feel there's a lot of opportunity to use barcode scanning for the benefit of the patient. So we'll probably see developments coming along there in years to come. And then we run a couple of other early access programs. So using barcodes, we all know about FMD, and I'll touch on that briefly. I mentioned that we do a full track and trace service on a lot of our services, and haemophilia is the gold standard for that. We use barcoding in terms of medication safety. So we can link the drug with the prescription to ensure that we are dispensing the correct drug. We can also do that in the home for our nurse, and supporting our nurses and our healthcare professionals in the home so that they can scan medication in the home and they know that the correct drug is going to be administered. We have temperature records during transport, and that can be linked right down to the serialized level of one individual vial. And really important, I suppose, from a HPRA or a patient safety perspective is effective recall. And then we also have a built-in expiry date barrier within our system, which is linked to barcode scanning. So a little bit on FMD then. So we took part in the IMVO working group and pilot program, which was really beneficial, and we learned an awful lot there. We use our own bespoke IT system in TCP. And when we wanted to integrate FMD scanning into that, because we're the only pharmacy customer in Ireland, I suppose the cost was too high, really. So we went with the standalone scanning system for the FMD scanning. From our perspective, I suppose implementation went very well, because scanning was always there, and it was already ingrained in the daily life in the pharmacy. So our staff were already scanning before we even had to implement FMD. So I suppose we embraced the concept. So we do find this a system we invested in is quick and efficient to use. Some teething problems, because I suppose we're relying on humans and I suppose training, and rather than the system. So I suppose to mitigate that, we would put in kind of spot checks or audits to make sure that our FMD process and scanning is embraced and is working well. So I wanted to talk about haemophilia because this is where we have our full track and trace system. And I suppose this is a gold standard, not just in Ireland, but globally, about what has been done in the past. So interestingly, it's World Haemophilia Day this Saturday. So haemophilia is a deficiency in blood factors, that are responsible for clotting. So a normal person, if we bleed or we bruise, we will normally clot, but in a haemophilia patient, there is a delay there and they will not. And that's because they're low in either usually factor 8 or factor 9. It's carried by females. It's known as the royal disease because I think Queen Victoria was one of the carriers, and a lot of royal families around Europe at that time were affected by haemophilia, but it presents in males. And the treatment is the use of blood clotting factors. And blood clotting factors, I suppose, in the past were derived from blood donations. Whereas now we've moved on to kind of third generation clotting factors, which would be from recombinant DNA technology. So I suppose what had happened then was really a dreadful event back in the 1970s and 1980s, which was a complete failure of the supply chain. So at that time, the blood-derived products were infected with hepatitis C and HIV. And the recall at that time was not effective at all. So the medication that was infected with HIV and hepatitis C remained in the supply chain even after the recall, leading to subsequent infection. And I suppose over 70 people died in Ireland alone, and over 100 haemophilia patients were affected. Now that brought us back to the use of the GS1 standards to enhance patient safety, to improve the medication recording compliance and reduce costs. And TCP was the first company globally to use a track and trace system using GS1 barcodes. I suppose it's a way to learn from our history. So within the GS1 model, I suppose there's a couple of different barcodes, the PMGRSN, which is kind of patient specific, the GTIN, which I think everyone will be familiar with from scanning the FMD, which is the Global Tracking Identification Number. We've location barcodes such as DLN, and the serialized shipping container code. That's important for us because we would often scan a particular vial into a box, which would be scanned to a patient, which would go onto a van, and that allows us to track and trace that right the way through the supply chain, and to even map the temperatures that go through that transport. So prior to implementing this system in haemophilia, I suppose we had, back in the day, no product barcodes, multiple charts, handwritten notes in the hospitals, incomplete retrospective information, non-validated delivery. So I suppose blood clotting factors going out in taxis, buses, anything like that, and a lot of product wastage as a result of that. So then by implementing the product barcoding, I suppose really you're reducing wastage within the supply chain. You're bringing in a lot of safety. So we would have validated the system in terms of encrypted messaging, in terms of validating the IT system to particular standards. The cold chain delivery now, we do validated cold chain transport with between 2 to 8 out to all the haemophilia patients around Ireland. There's an electronic patient record, and the barcode and the batch tracking is contained with that. And we can record not just what we've dispensed, but also what we have administered. So the patients will scan, they have an app on their phones, they will scan the barcode before they administer, and that will record the batch number, the expiry, and the product. And in the hospital setting, they will do the same on the wards if patients are in for inpatient treatment. So this is a picture now of one of the lads in the warehouse scanning a box of Benefix, which is a haemophilia product there. So you can see the handheld scanners that we use. And as I said, we scan everything. All the drugs are scanned all the time, and we do record both the batch number and the expiry throughout the system. So that gives us traceability of the patient home, which is a full track and trace system, which leads into effective recall. We can see each step of the process, which is really good. And that becomes useful, for instance, if you're investigating an error, if something went wrong. So we can see who processed the order, what time it came in, who picked the order, which pharmacist checked the order. I'll show you some screens later where we can set up a prescription against a drug. And if you try to scan another drug to that particular patient, the system won't let you do it. So I suppose that brings in some medication safety into the system. We can't scan an expired drug into an order. The order itself cannot be scanned onto a van unless the pharmacist check has been completed on the handheld. So there's different statuses within the system. I suppose that's a barrier. So in case a driver tries to load an order onto a van and it hasn't been checked by a pharmacist, he can't actually load it and scan it onto the van. Quarantine stock or return stock can't be scanned into an order. And our nurses do scan the medication for the ones that we dispense in the home prior to administration. I suppose that's a double safety check for them when they're doing lone working, which is a really good benefit. So this is a couple of screenshots of our own system in TCP. Now these screenshots are from our QA system, so it's a fake patient. This is Roy Keane. And so just to kind of maybe draw one or two things to your attention here. So you can see these products under the product grouping here, Advate and Faba. So that means that we're setting up that prescription at the very outset against the patient profile. So if a couple of days or a couple of months later, 6 months down the line or 5 months down the line, we're trying to scan something else into that patient box, we can't. So if we picked Benefix and tried to scan it to an Advate patient, it won't actually scan into the box. So that's a really core safety piece that we can do. And within that, we have like a pharmacist approval and a pharmacist check, just to set up the prescription at the very outset. This screenshot now shows us our batch tracking. So as you can see here, these are all the different batches of Advate that we would have had at a point in time. The first column received will tell us how many of that particular, how many vials we will have got. The issued column there, 8, will tell us that 8 vials have gone out to patients. And the in-stock column on the far end will tell us that there are 12 left in the fridge in TCP. And as you can see, the batch number and the expiry date is always recorded the whole way through the system. We can take that a little bit a level further, and these are the 8 files that have gone out. So the very last column there, which is the current location, in real life, that'll actually tell you, the name of the patient or the name of the hospital where that barcode was delivered and dispensed. So that allows us to do an effective recall, because we can look at the recall at an individual serialized level and see exactly what files went out and where they are now. So we talked about effective recall, and this is the learning from hemophilia and what went wrong there. So our current system can show us the location of the current vials, whether they're in the patient home, are they still in TCP, are they out in the hospital blood lab, are they on the van. The patient app that the patients use to scan their vials can show what was used at home. And then the hospital electronic scanning records can show what's been used in the hospital. So when we put those 3 pieces of information, what's been dispensed and what's been used together, we can reconcile all the information and have full traceability. And that's our learning, I suppose, from the history of the service. This just is another screenshot to show you that the system will record, who did what at a point in time. So for this particular vial, we know exactly what date and time it came into the receiving area, who scanned it into the area, which pharmacist did the check, what warehouse operative then either dispensed it or put together an order to the hospital, and what driver would have delivered it to the hospital and when. So that's, I suppose, really a summary of what we can do. I suppose from my perspective, really, it's great to have patient traceability to the highest level. To have a medication safety that's built into the system from the very outset, with the aim of, I suppose, reducing any risk or mitigating risk to the patient and improving patient care. There's lots of other options I think you can look at with barcode scanning, looking at patient compliance, looking at clinical trials and patient diaries, that sort of thing that will come in the future or that are already in place. And we are supporting our nurses in the home with that additional piece with the lone working, so that they can also scan the vials to ensure that they're giving the correct product in the home, so that they're not left kind of without that check that you might have had in the hospital scenario. So thank you very much.
Super, Maeve, that's really interesting, and I think it was exactly what we wanted at the end of the presentation, was to show, I think everyone is struggling with the basic concept of scanning for FMD purposes, but actually when you see in a system where they've really taken barcode scanning, looking at it every which way, how it can be used to improve the journey of the medication through the pharmacy, through delivery, right down to patient level. Now it is using software that's not FMD software, but I think it's just illustrating the point that those FMD barcodes have information in them that have huge capacity to be used in other ways. So I think it just gives an indication of how it can be built upon.